All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a literal textual cold case. We're going to explore this absolutely fascinating linguistic mystery surrounding one of history's most famous figures of patience, Job, or Ayub. For centuries, there's been this one specific passage about his life that has just baffled readers because it presents a bizarre scenario that seems totally out of character for him. But what if the way we've been reading this text all along has just been entirely wrong? What if a single mistranslated word has been hiding a remarkable, highly logical story for generations? Well, let's get started and unravel this mystery together.
Okay, let's dive straight into this. Look at the traditional translation of verse 38:44. According to this, Job is actually commanded by God to take a bundle of grass to lightly strike his wife. Why? Allegedly to fulfill this hasty oath he made to punish her with 100 lashes. I mean, seriously, just think about that for a second. A man universally celebrated for his unwavering patience is suddenly commanded to take out his frustration on his wife with handfuls of grass? It's a highly unusual and frankly a pretty baffling command. So, this brings us to the absolute core mystery of today's explainer. Does this incredibly confusing marital punishment genuinely belong in the original text, or did history somehow mistranslate a very practical, real-world medical emergency? To figure this out, we're basically going to act as textual detectives today. We'll examine the sources, the language, and the context to reconstruct what actually went down.
Section 1. The suspect, witnesses, and the flaws in the tradition.
When we put the major traditional accounts on the stand, a pretty glaring problem pops up right away. They totally contradict each other. For instance, Ibn Kathir claims Job wanted to punish his wife simply because she asked why he didn't pray for a cure. Okay, but then Tafsir al-Qutubi says, no, she was tricked by Satan into saying a word of disbelief. And then Tafsir al-Jalalain claims the punishment was literally just because she was late coming back to him one time. These wildly different backstories strongly suggest that, well, no one actually knew for sure why this supposed punishment was even happening in the first place.
And honestly, the contradictions don't stop there. There are some massive logical holes in this traditional narrative. First off, none of these commentators actually cite any traditional narrations, or a hadith, to support their claims. It's highly likely they were just embellishments, trying to make sense of a really confusing verse. Second, the whole idea of fulfilling an oath with a symbolic gesture directly contradicts the text's own rules for oaths. Chapters 5 and 2 explicitly state you shouldn't be held to thoughtless oaths, and that broken, earnest oaths are redeemed by charity or fasting, not by symbolic striking. Plus, in other verses, Job's family is clearly described as a mercy, not some negative influence.
Moving on to Section 2, the forensic clues, rethinking the roots.
Now, what's really interesting about this is our first major linguistic clue. The word dikthan. The traditional commentators translated this as a bundle or handful of grass. But if you actually open up classical Arabic dictionaries, the word has multiple meanings. It can also mean a handful of water, or the act of washing without cleansing, kind of like rapidly rubbing a wound with water. This gives us an entirely different physical action. We aren't holding grass here, we are holding water.
But wait, here is the most shocking clue of the whole shebang. In verse 38:41, Job cries out that he has been afflicted by shaitan. We almost universally translate this root word as Satan or some invisible devilish opposing force. However, a super well-known classical Arabic meaning for this exact root is a venomous serpent or cobra. Yeah, a snake.
Now, if you're a bit skeptical that the text would actually use the word this way, let's look at how it cross-references itself. In the entire text, there are only 2 occurrences where this specific root word is the subject doing the physical touching or afflicting. One is Job's verse, and the other is verse 275, which describes people standing as if a shaitan has confounded them from its touch. In this context, it perfectly describes the neurological, completely disorienting effects of a literal snakebite. The text even uses it again later in chapter 37 to describe the heads of a tree looking like the heads of serpents.
All right, Section 3, the reveal, reconstructing the scene.
So, when we plug these classical root meanings back in, verse 38:41 suddenly shifts from this vague spiritual complaint into an incredibly urgent physical crisis. Job isn't complaining about the devil whispering in his ear. He is crying out, "The serpent or cobra has afflicted me with distress and suffering." Job, who was likely out traveling in the land, has suffered a sudden severe snakebite.
Which brings us to Section 4,
The medical reveal, a prescription, not a punishment.
Okay, look at the exact steps the text gives Job in the following verses. First, he's told to strike the ground with his foot to find a cool spring to wash with and drink. Drinking water slows the heart rate and rehydrates the body, right? While washing obviously lessens the risk of infection. Next comes our key word, dichtan. He is told to take a handful of water and wash the wound. Finally, he's told, do not incline towards falsehood. Why? Because a huge common symptom of a severe snakebite is extreme delirium. He's being told to fight through the venom-induced delusion, or perhaps not to fail in his duty once he recovers. This isn't a marital punishment, this is literally ancient first aid for a snakebite.
And you know what makes this so incredibly compelling? The grammar itself. Verse 44 begins with wow, meaning and, which connects it directly back to the previous instruction about the cool spring. The pronoun it in wash with it refers back to the closest preceding masculine noun, which is the spring water. The verse provides a perfect, entirely self-contained explanation without needing any outside rumors about his wife whatsoever.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how massive the difference is here. On one hand, the traditional myth requires us to swallow a contradictory backstory that violates the text's own rules on oaths, and it turns a notoriously patient prophet into a randomly aggressive husband. But on the other hand, the medical reality relies purely on the text's own internal context. It perfectly aligns with classical Arabic dictionary definitions, and it completely logically addresses a physical emergency.
Finally, Section 5, the power of context, correcting ancient myths. So why does this holistic reading absolutely nail it? Well, it checks every single logical box. It fits the actual Arabic grammar and those classical root meanings to a T. It's fully supported by cross-referencing how the text uses these exact words elsewhere. It creates a self-contained logic that doesn't require us to invent external narratives. But most importantly, it actually restores Job's character. At the end of the passage, he is praised as patient and oft-returning. Surviving a terrifying snakebite and enduring that painful recovery period perfectly embodies those traits. The text often corrects ancient myths, and honestly, this seems to be a prime example of exactly that. Look at the biblical parallel in Job chapter 2, verse 7. It explicitly states that Satan, or the serpent, smote Job with sore boils starting from the sole of his foot. A physical bite on the foot followed by a long recovery period where Job sits in silence. It mirrors our linguistic reconstruction perfectly.